Half a year after the apocalypse, I was living quietly underground like a mouse. Next to me lived my ex-boyfriend and his current partner. Above me resided my father and his new girlfriend. Outside, countless zombies were reveling in chaos, and their supplies were running dangerously low. Welcome to Panda Storyboard. Put on your headphones, get cozy, and settle in. Let's enjoy this story together. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe and give the video a like. Now, let's begin. One morning, my father and his girlfriend came knocking. Opening the door, I saw my father's gloomy face and the woman beside him with her high arched eyebrows. My father sat on my sofa, frowning. "Brielle, I came to discuss something important with you today." I sighed inwardly, sat opposite him, and braced myself for a lecture. Looking up at me, he said, "Brielle, you're an adult now. I fulfilled my duties as a father. Now it's time for you to show your filial duty." My emotions were mixed. I'd nearly forgotten how long it had been since I last saw him. Over the years, he probably hadn't thought about how long it had been since he last summoned me either. He always ignored my existence unless absolutely necessary, like now. Always frowning, as if even a glance was bothersome. I forced a smile. "How would you like me to show my filial piety?" Perhaps sensing my lack of deference, his expression hardened. "Your brother is about to start high school, and I want him to study here. I think you should transfer this apartment to me." I looked around the spacious apartment, about 200 square meters, a gift from my mother when I entered high school, and where I'd lived since. I chuckled. This place is worth over 10 million. Without a word, the woman sitting next to him, who had been eyeing the apartment greedily, suddenly turned with a look of disbelief. "Brielle, your father raised you for 18 years. The bond between a father and daughter is deep as the ocean. Are you really treating this as a transaction with your own father? Did he raise an ingrate?" See, this is the art of manipulation by a mistress, stirring up men's fragile nerves with just a few words. As expected, my father erupted in anger, suddenly looking imposing. He stood up abruptly and swung his hand at me, shouting, "Have you no conscience? Was raising you all for nothing?" I dodged, my movement practiced for over a decade, except for the first few years when my face was often swollen. In recent years, he hardly ever managed to hit me. I laughed. "How many years have you called me an ingrate? Why still harbor any illusions about me? Haven't you always said that I'm undutiful? And now you expect me to suddenly become the epitome of filial piety?" As my father advanced again, failing to hit me, he was frustrated. I smirked, pulled an electric stun baton from my pocket, and pressed it against his hand. Without a glance at the man who fell in front of me, I smiled sweetly at the stunned woman opposite me, and, with precise aim, pressed the stun baton against her heavily made-up face. The woman, looking incredulous, covered her face, unable to utter a word, before collapsing heavily to the ground. Her large, swollen figure hit the floor, almost causing it to shake. I crouched down, looked at her, and felt it wasn't enough satisfaction. Without realizing it, I jabbed the stun gun a few more times into the worn face of the old white flower, deriving some pleasure as I watched her hefty body convulse repeatedly. Turning to the man beside me, I sighed, directing the stun gun at his hand, the same hand that had kept my cheeks persistently swollen for a long time back then. Oh, and then a few more strikes at his ankles, which back in the day had kicked my frail body out several times, causing me to crash to the ground and slam into walls like a free-falling projectile. I stood up and glanced one last time at the two people sprawled across my living room floor. The man, rough and greasy, the woman baffling me. I rubbed my chin, unable to comprehend how someone with her face caked in makeup like plaster and eyebrows drawn like crayon Shin-chan could have ever bewitched my father so completely. Dragging the unconscious bodies out of my house was no easy task, but once done, I closed the door, collapsed on the sofa, and took a long drink of water. Previously, I only knew how to dodge, never to resist, especially around my father, the only tangible relative I had. I always tolerated him repeatedly. However, once I discovered his true nature, any father-daughter affection was thoroughly severed. Severed it was, and I hadn't forgotten all the beatings from before. Now they dared to torment me again. Why should I endure any longer? My name is Brielle. I take my last name from my mother, which I guess is another reason my father deeply resents me. My mother is a research scientist, often away from home. My father was her college classmate. After graduation, he started working, while my mother continued with her graduate studies. They married later, and a year after I was born, around when I was 10, my mother rarely came home. At 12, they divorced, and I stayed with my father. The month they divorced, my father remarried. His new wife brought along a boy 3 years my junior, suddenly making our household a lively one. The new wife was a master of words, easily provoking my father into beating me with just a few manipulative comments, while my new stepbrother cheered him on from the sidelines. Gradually, through the beatings from my father and the sarcastic taunts from his new wife, I came to understand the reasons for my father's anger. Presumably my mother's infidelity, staying out at nights, and supposedly humiliating him, which emasculated him as a man. Back then, I was naive, believing that my mother had indeed been unfaithful, feeling guilty and remorseful toward my father, and thus quietly enduring their abuse for years. Eventually, I began to see things more clearly. Whether my mother had an affair or not, I didn't know. Should I just accept their word as truth? Besides, even if she did, was it my fault? I learned to dodge. From my father's new wife, I learned how to be eloquent, how to subtly insult, and how to sow discord. From my father's new son, I learned to be ruthless, selfish, and to kick others when they were down. Until 3 years ago, when my mother finally appeared. She was exhausted, but embraced me, thorns and all, crying her heart out. Her tears washed away my resistance, turned my sorrow into tears, and softened my bitterness. She stayed with me for a month, leaving me this house and a bank card. She gave me much advice before reluctantly leaving. She hadn't had an affair. She'd been engaged in scientific research in a secret lab, which often kept her from coming home. It was my father who had the affair. No wonder he seemed closer to his new son than to his own. That boy was his biological child. No wonder that family of 3 seemed so harmoniously happy. They truly were a family. I managed to keep a low profile during my 3 years of high school and got into a local university. I decided I wanted nothing to do with that family anymore. Unexpectedly, just half a year later, they showed up at my door. With a sigh, although I managed to send them away, I knew they would disturb my peace again. I needed to think of a solution. As I was pondering how to escape from my worthless father and his mistress, my phone suddenly rang with a sharp, jarring tone I'd set specifically for my mother. Frantically, I checked it. It was a message with just one word: run. My heart sank. Over these 3 years, I'd rarely heard from my mother. The sudden message unnerved me, but I didn't hesitate. I trusted her completely. I immediately grabbed my backpack, pulled out my already packed emergency bag, scooped up my cat Jojo, and dashed out the door. I drove straight out of the city, heading toward the mountains on the outskirts. My destination was my grandmother's villa, a place my father knew about but thought was just an unfinished construction project. What he didn't know was that my grandmother had completed it, decorated it, and even lived there for several years before she died. The villa was located deep in the mountains, surrounded by incomplete residential developments. It looked abandoned from the outside. But inside, my grandmother had created something extraordinary. When I arrived and punched in a code, the door opened to reveal a beautifully decorated interior. But that wasn't the most shocking part. My grandmother had left me detailed instructions about a secret basement, an underground bunker she'd built beneath the villa. The entrance was hidden behind a bookshelf in the study. When I found it and descended the stairs, I was stunned. The underground space was massive, easily 200 square meters or more. It had everything: a fully equipped kitchen, a cold storage room, a bedroom, a bathroom, a study, a leisure area, even gym equipment. The cold storage was stocked with food that could last me years. There were gas cylinders, firewood, water filtration systems, a composting toilet that could serve me for over a decade. Everything was designed for long-term survival. I wandered around this underground castle in shock, terrified by what kind of unknown disaster had made my grandmother go to such lengths to prepare this for me. It took me the next 3 years to fully stock and understand this place. Then the apocalypse came. Just as my mother had warned, a virus outbreak turned people into zombies. The world descended into chaos, and I was safe, hidden in my underground bunker, while the world above burned. But I wasn't alone for long. My boyfriend Zachary showed up at the villa door with a girl named Serena. Through the security camera, I watched them beg to be let in, claiming they'd barely escaped the zombie hordes. I knew I shouldn't trust anyone. My mother had warned me, but part of me, the part that was still human, still lonely, wanted to believe. So I let them in. Zachary and Serena settled into the upstairs part of the villa. I remained in my secret basement, which they didn't know about. For a while, it was almost peaceful. Serena cooked, Zachary cleaned, and they treated me like a princess. Then my father and his family showed up. Through the camera, I watched them sob and beg to be let in. My father, the man who'd beaten me for years, was now crying and pleading for his life. I didn't want to let them in. But Serena begged me to show mercy, and stupidly, foolishly, I agreed. That's when things started to fall apart. The resources meant to last me years were now being shared among 6 people. My father's family ate voraciously, never grateful, always demanding more. Zachary and Serena grew distant, spending more time together, whispering in corners. I started to realize I'd made a terrible mistake. These people weren't here to survive together. They were here to take everything from me. My father's eyes lingered on the villa's supplies. Zachary and Serena grew bolder, acting like they owned the place. One day, I overheard them talking. They were planning something. My father wanted to find where I was hiding the real supplies. He knew there had to be more. Zachary was helping him, using his relationship with me to gain my trust. I'd been betrayed again. But this time, I wasn't the helpless girl my father used to beat. This time, I had my grandmother's foresight, my mother's warning, and my own hard-won strength. I retreated to my secret basement and sealed the entrance. Let them search the villa above. They'd never find me. I had everything I needed down here. Food, water, shelter, and so I did. For months, I lived in my underground sanctuary while they lived above, growing more desperate as their supplies dwindled. I listened through hidden microphones as they argued, fought, and gradually turned on each other. My father blamed Serena for wasting food. Zachary accused my father's family of hoarding. The mistress cried and manipulated, just like she always had. And through it all, I was safe below, watching their dysfunction through cameras, listening to their desperation. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Raiders came, violent groups looking for supplies, willing to kill for them. I watched through the cameras as they attacked the villa, breaking through the reinforced doors my grandmother had installed. My father's family tried to fight back, but failed. Zachary and Serena tried to negotiate, but were ignored. I heard screams, gunshots, pleas for mercy. And then, silence. When it was over, I waited. Days passed. Weeks. I stayed hidden in my bunker, venturing out only when I was absolutely certain everyone was gone. The villa above was destroyed. Bodies lay where they'd fallen. But I was alive. I'd survived because I'd trusted my mother, because my grandmother had prepared for the worst, because I'd finally learned to choose myself over people who would only use me. Months turned into years. Through a radio I'd found in the bunker, I learned that humanity was slowly rebuilding. Safe zones were being established. A vaccine was being developed. The zombie threat was gradually being contained. But I stayed in my bunker. What was waiting for me outside? A world that had collapsed? People who'd proven they couldn't be trusted? I had everything I needed here. Safety, solitude, peace. Until one day, 3 years after the apocalypse began, I heard a sound I never expected to hear again. A voice calling my name. A voice I recognized, but thought I'd never hear again. My mother. She'd found me. She'd survived, and she'd brought someone with her, a man with graying hair who looked vaguely familiar. Brielle, my mother said, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything, but you're safe now. The nightmare is over. I looked at her, at the man beside her, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not fear, just exhaustion. Who is he? I asked. My mother took a deep breath. He's my mentor, the man I've been working with all these years, the man who helped develop the vaccine that saved humanity. She paused. And he's your real father. I stared at them both, processing this information. The man who'd beaten me for years wasn't even my biological father. The mother who'd abandoned me had actually been saving the world. And this stranger was the reason I existed. The virus, I said slowly. It wasn't an accident, was it? My mother shook her head. No, it was deliberate. an international organization trying to control human population through selective extinction. My mentor discovered their plan, defected, and spent years developing a counter-vaccine. That's why I had to disappear. That's why I had to leave you. I was protecting you by staying away. And my grandmother knew? She was part of it. She built this bunker because she knew what was coming. She wanted to make sure you'd survive, no matter what. My mother reached for my hand. I know I failed you as a mother. I know I can never make up for the years you suffered. But you're alive, Brielle. You survived, and I'm so proud of you. I pulled my hand away. Proud? You left me with an abusive man who beat me for years. You let me think I was worthless, unwanted. And now you show up and tell me it was all for the greater good? I know, she whispered. I know, and I'm sorry. If I could go back and change it, I would, but I can't. All I can do is be here now and try to make things right. I looked at her, at this woman who'd given birth to me, abandoned me, saved the world while I suffered. I should hate her. I wanted to hate her. But all I felt was tired. I need time, I finally said. I need time to process all of this. She nodded, understanding. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Not anymore. And so I walked out of my underground bunker for the first time in 3 years. The sunlight was blinding, the air was fresh, the world outside was different, scarred, rebuilding, but alive. I learned later what had happened to everyone. Little Serena died in the raid. Zachary died too. My so-called father, the man who'd beaten me, also died. But some people survived. The mistress with the crayon Shin-chan eyebrows was alive. My stepbrother, too. I visited them once, out of morbid curiosity. They'd changed, become humbler, less arrogant. Survival had a way of doing that to people. My mother and her mentor, my real father, were working on rebuilding efforts, helping establish safe zones, ensuring the vaccine reached everyone who needed it. They wanted me to join them, to be part of the new world they were creating. I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if I wanted to. For 3 years I'd lived in isolation, learning to trust no one, depending only on myself. Could I change that? But as I stood in the sunlight, feeling its warmth on my face for the first time in years, I realized something. I'd survived. Against all odds, through betrayal and violence and apocalypse, I'd survived. And maybe that was enough. Maybe survival was its own kind of victory. The world had ended and been reborn. Maybe I could do the same. Maybe.